Tonight, the warnings about that sub before it went into the ocean with 5 people on board.
It's just tragic and it's horrific and it's unnecessary.
The concerns from other deep-sea explorers that went unanswered. No more pride jerseys for NHL players.
It's the largest way we can say, like, you belong here.
The criticism the decision is sparking off the ice. We take you to Texas, where they've banned gender-affirming care for trans kids.
The state that is right now full of hate.
The very personal impact.
People just really don't get it.
This is The National with Anita Bath.
Ian is on assignment tonight. The search for answers is on. Canada's Transportation Safety Board is launching an investigation into the Titan tragedy after the submersible was found destroyed on the ocean floor. On dive after dive, the experimental sub took people down into the void of the deep ocean. The appeal was obvious for some. A first-hand look at the Titanic wreckage, a journey both remote and dangerous. But tonight, Kayla Hounsell is bringing us the concerns others had about the company that operated the submersible, about its unregulated design, and about how those warnings may have been brushed aside.
When the Titan was in its early stages, its creators had support from a leading deep-sea ocean expert, until they didn't.
Once the decision was made not to class the vehicle, not to get the vehicle certified, I ended my association with OceanGate.
We caught up with Rob McCallum out at sea. He told us he flagged his concerns about the Titan to OceanGate's CEO Stockton Rush back in 2018.
Once Stockton had made the decision to use carbon fiber, he was never going to get certified. It's never going to be an approved material.
He emailed Rush. The response? We have heard the baseless cries of "you are going to kill someone" way too often. I take this as a serious personal insult. Did you ever think about going public with this information?
Stockton threatened me with legal action if I went any further with my course of action.
Rush was among those killed in what officials say was a catastrophic implosion.
It's just tragic and it's horrific and it's unnecessary.
Titanic filmmaker James Cameron says Rush asked him if he wanted to dive with him this season. Cameron wasn't interested.
OceanGate shouldn't have been doing what it was doing. I think that's pretty clear.
Though multiple countries were involved in the search, Canada's Transportation Safety Board says it is the investigative authority because the submersible's mother ship, the Polar Prince, sails under the Canadian flag. But the investigation will take time.
Especially when people in this case have lost their lives. So there's ramifications.
OceanGate's co-founder says Rush was committed to safety.
One of the risks that the community takes every time it operates is that if there is some sort of catastrophic failure, the general public will backlash.
Many in the small city of St. John's, now the center of global attention, are reeling.
Absolutely heartbroken. It's a big tragedy. We're all feeling it, believe me.
And the investigation is only just beginning.
Kayla, what else do we know about the investigation?
We don't have a lot of details at this point, Anita. I can tell you TSB investigators have arrived here in St. John's to begin gathering information and conducting interviews. Also, 2 ships involved in the search have just returned here behind me, and the Polar Prince, which towed the Titan out to sea, is also on its way back into port here in St. John's.
Thanks, Kayla. The Royal Canadian Air Force has identified the 2 men killed in a Chinook helicopter crash in the Ottawa River on Tuesday. They are 32-year-old Captain David Domagala from Woodstock, Ontario, and 53-year-old Captain Marc LaRouche from Amos, Quebec. Domagala was an Army reservist before becoming a pilot and joining a helicopter squadron in 2019. LaRouche served with several helicopter squadrons over his 3-decade career. The investigation into the crash continues. Now to a developing story in Russia. Russian authorities have called for the head of the infamous Wagner mercenary group to be arrested for organizing an armed rebellion. There are reports of Wagner troops entering a Russian city. Briar Stewart is following the developments for us. Briar, let's start with what's happening right now.
Well, Anita, the Wagner Group released a video which appears to show some of its fighters, including the leader Yevgeny Prigozhin, inside the city of Rostov-on-Don, which is in southern Ukraine. And it appears to show them outside of a military headquarters. And they're demanding the military's top brass, or they say they will stay and blockade the city and even move to Moscow. Now, this comes just hours after Prigozhin declared a rebellion. He says he has 25,000 fighters who are willing to die for what he calls a march for justice. And who they're after is the Minister of Defense, Sergei Shoigu, and the top general, Gerasimov. And so these are the men that he has been complaining about for months, often in rage-filled statements. And he has released a number of statements today talking about what he wants to do. And in one of those, he says, "Those who destroyed our lads, who destroyed the lives of many tens of thousands of Russian soldiers, will be punished. I ask that no one offer resistance."
And Briar, Prigozhin was once a key part of Russia's war effort in Ukraine, but it looks like there's no going back.
Well, Prigozhin is trying to frame this as not a coup, but certainly that's how the Russian authorities are seeing it. They have launched a criminal investigation for charges of mutiny, and if he is arrested, he could face 20 years in prison.
Briar Stewart reporting from London tonight. Pakistani officials confirmed today about 350 of its citizens were aboard that capsized migrant ship. The government is now promising to crack down on human trafficking. Chris Brown shows us the anguish of the families left behind.
More than a week after the Greece migrant boat disaster, the enormity of the loss for Pakistan is becoming clear. 28 men from this single village in Kashmir are now thought to have been on board. Only 2 were rescued. In house after house, there are mourners. This man's son and 4 nephews are missing. His son sent him videos of everyone crammed together on the floor before boarding. They were charged as much as $8,000 US each for the trip. He pledged his house as a guarantee, said this relative of one of the missing. "I've been living in it with my 2 toddlers." Families want Pakistan's government to cover those debts. Wahid Wazir's younger brother Imran is presumed drowned. "I request the government pay us back. What happened to our brother shouldn't happen to anyone else." Authorities believe there were at least 350 Pakistanis on board the derelict fishing vessel when it sank.
281 families ne.
Pakistan's Interior Minister told Parliament 281 families have contacted the government, fearing relatives were on board. Many of them have gone to hospitals to give DNA samples to try to identify the dead, clutching photos of those they've lost. In Pakistan, inflation is raging and jobs are scarce, which is pushing people to make terrible choices, says Mohammed Sawar Bhatti, who lost his brother Hamid on the boat. "There was a time when my brother would provide anything his children asked for, but for the past 3 years, things have gone downhill." Families here fear human smuggling is bound to increase, along with the desperation. Chris Brown, CBC News, London.
Turning to the wildfire situation here in Canada and more evacuations in northern Quebec. About 3,000 people from the Cree community of Mistassini are out of their homes. And in northwestern Ontario, Environment Canada has put out a special air quality statement about the smoke from the wildfires, warning that the elderly, people with breathing problems, and outdoor workers are especially at risk. An air quality alert is in place for the interior of Labrador, including Labrador City. Smoke from those Quebec wildfires is causing the haze, which is considered a high health risk. And criticism is rolling into the NHL's decision to no longer have players wear special jerseys on theme nights. This comes after some players refused to wear pride jerseys during warm-up. As Katie Nicholson explains, there is worry this simply sets the league back.
A brief, colorful show of support, no more. Those Pride warm-up jerseys given the cold shoulder by some NHL players now officially off the ice.
We're not going to change jerseys for warm-up because that's just become more of a distraction from really the essence of what the purpose of these nights are.
While the NHL's decision applies to all so-called special interest jerseys, critics say there's no denying what this is really about.
It's hard for me to say that there's a player out there that, balked at wearing a Hockey Fights Cancer jersey.
NHL teams have long sported special interest jerseys in support of the military or cancer research. But when a handful of players refused to don LGBTQ colors last season, it created divisions in the league and public opinion.
Everybody's welcome in my locker room.
My choice is to stay true to myself and my religion.
The timing of this decision especially questionable for those who've worked hard to help the NHL be more inclusive.
It's a head scratcher a bit. Unfortunately, we're going into Pride weekend in, I believe, 3 of some major markets in the league.
The big leagues may not slip on Pride jerseys, but in the minors, at least one team is doubling down.
I think they're just doing a lot of damage to a relationship with the queer community that they've really struggled to pick the pieces up to begin with.
The Oshawa Generals promise to make their Pride jerseys bigger and better.
When it comes to the sport, the most important people are the players on the ice. That's who people come to see. So I think by them wearing that jersey, it's the largest way we can say, you belong here.
The NHL says despite the decision, Pride nights will continue, just without players wrapping themselves in those rainbow colors. Katie Nicholson, CBC News, Toronto.
This July 1st marks 100 years since the implementation of the Chinese Exclusion Act in Canada, an immigration policy with one goal: to keep Chinese people out. As Renee Filipponi shows us, the pain still lingers.
Almost a century after one of the most regrettable moments in Canadian history, dignitaries and descendants met in Canada's Senate to remember the Chinese Exclusion Act, legislation that impacted generations.
The Exclusion Act not only prevented new Chinese immigrants from entering Canada, but it also reinforced the negative stereotypes and prejudices against the Chinese community.
Backlash to Chinese immigration led to riots in the early 1900s, and ultimately a law which essentially banned Chinese immigration and forced everyone of Chinese descent, even those born in Canada, to register with the government. For the 24 years it was in place, fewer than 50 Chinese legally came to Canada.
The Canada didn't close the door to anybody from any country except the Chinese. That's the 100 years happened ago. So I think, is very dark history in Canada.
Hundreds of viewing parties were held across the country for people to come together and witness the event.
We were pretty overt about building a white Canada.
UBC professor Henry Yu helped organize this one. He sees parallels between the past legislation and rising anti-Asian racism brought on by the pandemic and allegations of foreign interference.
Implication is Chinese don't belong. Anyone Chinese is suspect. Anyone Asian who could be mistaken for Chinese is suspect. And those are part of a toolkit that have been around for more than 100 years.
Businessman Brant Louis echoed that sentiment. His grandfather came to Canada in 1896 and founded a successful business that now includes London Drugs.
For too long, many of our stories have been untold, ignored, or overlooked. I believe it is vital to our future that we understand our past.
To help ensure a better future for Chinese Canadians. Renee Filipponi, CBC News, Vancouver.
There's new reaction to an incident earlier this year at a school in Canada's second largest school board involving a teacher showing controversial Charlie Hebdo cartoons, then directing questions to a Muslim student. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson has the fallout.
It's coming from a person who's supposed to teach you.
Rahim Qassam says his son was a happy 16-year-old until one classroom incident in January. That day, a teacher displayed cartoons showing caricatures of Muslims.
At this point, my son is shocked that this is even happening. He's the only Muslim in the class.
Cartoons like those were the motivation for the 2015 terrorist attack on the Paris offices of the magazine that published them, Charlie Hebdo. 12 people were killed. Rahim Qassam said the teacher asked his son how he felt about them and the ensuing violence.
Start questioning what his views are on that. And at this point, my son realized he's being targeted.
The father spoke to the principal. The school apologized and started an investigation, placing the teacher on leave. After 3 months, the teacher was back at work.
Actually, it was like he was victimized again.
In a statement, the Peel District School Board says, "We're assured that the actions taken by the school are firm, responsive, and meaningfully respond to the incident and the impact." The board was the first in Canada to initiate an anti-Islamophobia strategy, which came into effect in January. This professor and former high school teacher says training can be effective.
It could be that the teacher had good intentions in bringing that to the classroom, but good intentions are not necessarily enough. You need to have also training and understanding.
One of his suggestions is for the teacher to speak to the family, or if they don't want to other members of the local Muslim community. The Qassam family says it's contemplating its next steps while reassuring their son that he belongs to the school he once loved. Deanna Sumanak-Johnson, CBC News, Toronto.
Well, Canadians are slowly returning to international travel. Travel isn't back to pre-pandemic levels yet, but Statistics Canada says in April, residents took more than 850,000 return trips overseas. That's up nearly 24% over the same period last year. Cross-border travel to the U.S. is also up more than 50%. And Canadians looking for discount travel have a new option. Play Air is a no-frills airline promising cheap flights from Ontario to Europe. But with other low-cost carriers shutting down, can this one survive? Philip de Montigny is tackling that question.
Play Airlines has arrived in Canada, giving travelers another cheaper option to fly to Europe. That is, if you travel light and don't mind flying out of Hamilton, Ontario.
If you want to bring extra baggage, you pay for that. If you want to eat something on the plane, you have to pay for it.
Play now flies to 26 European destinations, with a layover in Iceland. This personal finance expert says the cost savings could make the detour to Hamilton worthwhile.
Play comes in and offers a 25% discount compared to the mainline carriers. That could literally be a few $100s. If a family of 4 could end up saving $1,000 or even more.
But can those steep discounts last? In the last 2 weeks, WestJet announced it would shut down its 2 low-cost carriers, Sunwing and Swoop, merging them into its mainline business. In 2019, another Icelandic budget airline, WOW Air, abruptly ceased operations, leaving thousands of passengers without a way back home.
It was very unfortunate that they, shut down business and left a lot of people stranded. I actually had a ticket with them that I was supposed to be flying a week after those news emerged.
Play's CEO was a former WOW Air executive. He says he learned from past mistakes.
Be securely financed, have enough cash, don't grow too fast, securely choose your destinations, and so far we've been very successful, and this is the year where we will turn an operational profit.
There are lessons to be learned from WOW's failure. The concern is probably the frequency and the capacity they're offering after the summer peak.
The company says it plans to run flights daily year-round, knowing it'll lose money in the winter months. A gamble, it says, will help grow demand and, in the long run, feed its bottom line. Philippe de Montigny, CBC News, Toronto.
There are still many questions about the last dive of the submersible. The catastrophic implosion would have generated a pressure wave.
We didn't hear any of that throughout the whole search when we had sonar buoys in the water.
Why that kind of information could be crucial to the investigation. Plus, the class of 2023.
To see so many graduates this year, it gives us more hope.
The future of an Ontario First Nation celebrates the promise of this day. Canada's fixer-upper. We get access to the major renovation underway at Parliament's Centre Block.
It's probably Canada's most important tourist attraction and national symbol.
Where no stone goes unturned. We're back in 2. A large and complex renovation to Centre Block on Parliament Hill is well underway, removing toxic mold from the building and installing a new visitor centre. David Thurton got a first-hand look inside.
A fixer-upper like no other. The home of Canadian democracy is in the middle of a major reno. From top to bottom, crews have mostly stripped Centre Block of millions of pounds of toxic asbestos and stored away for safekeeping more than 20,000 heritage artifacts.
We're well on our way, and things are looking good.
Now crews are entering the next phase.
This is the most technically complex part of the project, so we are laser focused on getting this right.
Excavation crews have dug about 23 meters into this bedrock. That's about 3 floors deep, with the aim of improving the visitor experience.
With the creation of the Parliament Welcome Centre, Parliament is essentially getting a new front door.
Here's what the new space is expected to look like. The pathway will usher visitors into the new Welcome Centre underneath the Peace Tower. The new space allows Parliament to double the number of visitors it receives. It and the newly renovated Centre Block will be universally accessible, something that wasn't always the case.
You could get somebody in, but I would say it wasn't a very good experience. And if you ask the person that was in the wheelchair, they might find it a little less dignified than what it could be.
Another challenge, preserving a century of history.
There's almost 400,000 stones on the exterior.
Each stone, each gargoyle on its Gothic exterior is inspected, repaired, and cleaned using new and old tools.
We see tools that a mason would have recognized 1,000 years ago, all the way up to the laser.
There's more cutting-edge tech. New heating and cooling systems will make the building carbon neutral, and hundreds of shock absorbers in its foundations will help it better withstand the next big earthquake. All in all, a $5 billion project.
So that's what they're doing.
Money well spent, according to this historian.
This is Canada's most important heritage building, without question. It's probably Canada's most important tourist attraction and national symbol.
The project is expected to be completed by 2031 to bring a century-old symbol into the next era. David Thurton, CBC News, Ottawa.
Across the U.S., many believe gay and transgender rights are under attack. Texas is just one of the states to ban gender-affirming care for those under 18.
And I think Texas is so scared that they want to protect children, that they're not listening to the science that protects children.
Caught in the crosshairs are the children who need the care.
People just really don't get it.
And the Texas doctors who've been treating them.
The state that is right now full of hate.
The National takes you deeper into the stories shaping our world next. With anti-LGBTQ legislation and rhetoric gaining steam south of the border, the topic of transgender health care can feel very political. But for trans kids in Texas right now, it's personal. That state has banned gender-affirming care for most minors. Paul Hunter traveled there to see the impact firsthand.
It's 7:59 in North Texas, 90.1 KERA, Dallas, Fort Worth, Denton. Good morning to you. I'm Jamie Jackson.
This is one of the last times Jimena Lopez will ever make her way into downtown Dallas to go to work. She's an endocrinologist who treats and comforts transgender teens. But her job has now effectively been criminalized, turning her life upside down.
I'm sure I'll cry. I'm sure I'll see moms crying. Not all my patients know I'm leaving. It's hard.
At the end of next month, Lopez and her family will leave Texas and move to California. It's not their choice.
SB 14 fights to stop puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and mutilating surgeries.
Earlier this year, after an emotional and for the trans community ultimately demoralizing debate at the Texas legislature, the state prohibited the program Lopez has long offered.
SB 14 has passed the third reading.
A key sticking point for critics, the use of medication that blocks puberty in transgender teens.
I mean, I felt like, you know, things were evolving with society, with progress, and now we're going backwards. I never thought it would dissolve like this.
Hello.
It was back in 2015 when these images were taken that CBC News first met with Lopez. Then it was early days for her clinic in Dallas. Here, she's checking in on young Evan Singleton, a transgender boy. Evan, then just 12,
Can I see your implant?
always knew he was a boy. Her program helped him and his parents grow into that person. 8 years later, Texas is shutting it all down.
The movers have not come in yet.
In her now near empty home, Lopez says she feels hopelessness, sadness, anger.
This is your family?
Yeah.
Protesters have called her a child abuser, a Nazi, and said that she should die in hell. Her house is set to be sold.
The whole state has become crazy. I don't have any other words to explain it. My passion is to provide gender-affirming care to transgender youth, and that has been one of the most important things I've done in my life. And it's become impossible to do that safely.
Is it the case that you're worried about your own family's safety?
So I don't feel safe, especially with so many people with guns and people that have gone to protest against me or our clinic. Some of them have been armed. And I don't know. I'm afraid of leaving my son home alone. And I don't want to live like that.
Across the U.S., some 20 states have now banned what's known as gender-affirming care for those under 18. And throughout the country, nearly 500 state legislative bills have been put forward this year alone, all labeled by critics anti-LGBTQ. As for Texas, Lopez is blunt.
A state that is right now full of hate.
Caught in the crosshairs,
You and Nana.
her young trans patients.
Oh yeah, this is trying to give you a dump truck set and everything. You could have cared less.
Outside Dallas are Kristen and her 14-year-old daughter Audrey. They've asked that we not use their last names. Audrey is transgender.
Even at that age, she hated putting that jersey on, did not want to do that.
Always convinced that on the inside she was a girl, Audrey had her life changed by Lopez.
You're a girl.
Yeah.
You were born in a boy's body.
Mm-hmm. I don't think there is any other word to describe myself than a girl. I mean, like
For
online,
years,
there's
Audrey
stuff
had
online
been bullied, afraid, depressed, and yes, suicidal. Until
The first time that I met Dr. Lopez, I did think everything was going to change. I was very excited, yeah. Mostly I was thinking about how nobody would ever say anything to me again. They would finally, I don't know, accept me.
When I was in public school,
her treatment gave Audrey the courage to stand up in front of a crowd one day and defy a lifetime of bullying.
if you really don't like this, I don't care. But I am trans. I'm a trans female. I was born male and I identify as a female now. And
But as Texas now moves to end her treatment, her future is unclear.
We always had to keep fighting.
Her family in agony.
When Audrey was born, that was my firstborn son, right? And that was, a proud moment for a dad. And so, sorry.
Audrey's parents, proud, loving, and now fully supportive, weren't always so sure. Christian conservatives, Trump-voting Texans, as Audrey struggled, frustrated, no one believed she was a girl, her dad, Wes, and her mom, Kristen, sought help.
She was so depressed.
It was getting to the point where she's going to hurt herself. This counselor came and I will never forget, she sat down in front of me and she said, if you and Dad do not get on board, the chances of her committing suicide are very high. And this was at the age of 9.
Yeah, 9 years old.
And I was like, I came home, told him, I'm like, we have to do something because I don't know what to do anymore.
The day we started all the puberty blockers and stuff like that, I can tell you that was a different kid. Night and day. Night and day, different kid. She was so excited. It gave us so much hope to get her to that point, to get her to the next stage in life and those things. Because I don't think without it we would get there.
I don't think she would be here if we hadn't done something.
People just really don't get it.
But now, politics.
What are your hopes and dreams and what are your expectations given what's happening right now?
Hopefully something changes. I don't know what it will be. Maybe a new governor that is not at all homophobic, transphobic, any of the above.
If by now you're wondering, what about the long-term effects of this treatment? Does it really help? Well, on that, consider the clinic's very first patient.
Can you sit up?
Remember Evan Singleton, the trans teen who invited CBC into the clinic with Lopez back in 2015 as he was transitioning? Well, this is Evan now. 21 years old, bearded and broad-shouldered. His treatment has long since finished. He self-describes as a trans man. How are you feeling?
I feel great. I mean, I'm doing good. My gender is kind of exactly where I like it to be.
Evan tells us Lopez allowed him to be him. She turned his life around with treatment now taken away from those who, like he did, need it.
And I think Texas is so scared that they want to protect children, that they're not listening to the science that protects children. I'm an adult, and I do not regret my transition, and I am scared at what could have happened without it.
So I just want to show you this.
My Evan! Oh my God, his hair is long.
Isn't it? What do you think?
He looks happy. He looks happy and adulty.
Adulty.
It's what Lopez wants for all of her patients, past and present, but frustrated for those in her care now with their treatment outlawed by the politics of transgender in Texas.
I mean, what kind of people do we have in power? Aren't they supposed to be there to protect the most vulnerable? Because these kids, amongst all the kids, are the most vulnerable ones.
So, Paul, what happens to Audrey now?
Well, her meds will run out eventually, and by that time, Dr. Lopez will be in California, where this is still legal. Audrey's options, as with others like her, will be to travel at her expense for continued treatment or to be weaned off of it. Audrey, Dr. Lopez, and Evan are all courageous people. This is a very hot-button issue in that state. You know, when we were there, we heard from multiple others too fearful to speak out publicly, worried about stigma and violence. As she ages, Audrey worries about her future, but her courage in speaking out underlines she and her family simply feel so strongly about this. It's her life.
Paul, thank you.
You're welcome.
Coming up, a closer look at what happened to the Titan submersible and what the crew might have endured after that catastrophic implosion. And later.
I'd show them this massive plant. A few of them were petrified. Some were impressed.
The giant vine that says, "Stay away." Our moment is one for the record book. Those on board the Titan submersible are all presumed dead. 3 crew members, including OceanGate CEO, had been on many dives before. But Shahzada Dawood, a prominent investor from Pakistan, and his 19-year-old son Suleiman had not. And according to Suleiman's aunt, the teen was apprehensive.
He was very, very not into doing it, but It was a Father's Day thing. It was a bonding experience.
Suleiman and his father set out together in the Titan on Father's Day. Andrew Chang shows us what we know about the fate of the Titan submersible and everyone inside it.
Essentially, we found 5 different major pieces of debris that told us that it was the remains of the Titan.
According to the U.S. Coast Guard, an ROV, a remote-operated vehicle, was able to scour the ocean floor near the Titanic wreckage. A few hundred meters away, they found this.
The initial thing we found was the nose cone, which was outside of the pressure hull.
That was clue number 1. Soon after, they found a large debris field where they found other components. They analyzed what they looked like, compared them to the design specs of the Titan submersible, and it seemed like a match.
Shortly thereafter, we found a second smaller debris field. Within that debris field, we found the other end of the pressure hull, the aft end bell, which was basically comprised of the totality of that pressure vessel.
It was all consistent with the components used to build the Titan, but they also think the debris tells them something about how the Titan went down. Not a slow, steady leak, but rather a violent, sudden change in pressure.
This is an incredibly unforgiving environment down there on the seafloor, and the debris is consistent with a catastrophic implosion of the vessel.
A catastrophic implosion is what can happen when you are subjected to the incredible pressure of being so deep underwater. You know, the Titan wreckage is about 13,000 feet below sea level. When you're that far down, the forces acting on the hull of the ship, many thousands of pounds per square inch, you know, I've heard it compared to having the equivalent of an Empire State Building crushing you from all sides.
We've taken a regular styrofoam coffee cup, and that's then strapped to the outside of the submersible in a net bag. And when we eventually come up topside and recovered, the actual same coffee cup is basically that size.
The big question right now is how such a catastrophic implosion could have happened. You know, it was an experimental sub. That was literally written on the death waiver passengers have to sign to be allowed on board. And a lot has been said about the cavalier attitude that the company's CEO had when it came to safety, innovation, and pushing the envelope with, you know, new materials never before used in a sub of this kind. But we also learned something that tells us about the timing of the implosion. You know, you'll recall the Titan lost contact with its mothership on the surface partway through its descent. This was on Sunday morning. They should have returned by the afternoon, but didn't. And it was only that evening the Coast Guard was alerted. Then it was roughly another day until a Canadian plane would arrive, dropping sonar buoys into the water. You can think of those like underwater microphones. It gave search teams listening capability. So here's the thing. There's this period between Sunday and Monday where nobody had any clue what was going on down there. And the suggestion seems to be, from the Coast Guard, that's when the implosion likely happened.
This was a catastrophic implosion of the vessel, which would have generated a significant broadband sound down there that the sonar buoys would have picked up.
They would have heard the implosion if it had happened while their sonar buoys were deployed, but they heard nothing. I mention this because it tells us something about what the crew's final moments might have been like. You see, the great fear here was that death would have been slow and unbearable. Imagine, you're trapped all alone in a 22-foot hunk of carbon fiber. It's cold because sunlight can't penetrate the water. There's limited food, limited water to drink, only a single porthole that you can't even look through without powering the ship's lights because it's pitch black on the other side, and you're running out of oxygen. Perhaps a silver lining in all of this is that in the case of a violent implosion, death would have been instantaneous.
On behalf of the United States Coast Guard and the entire Unified Command, I offer my deepest condolences to the families. I can only imagine what this has been like for them, and I hope that this discovery provides some solace during this difficult time.
Just ahead, a day of celebration for an Ontario First Nation. After so many hardships, why these graduates bring hope to the community. At the Pikangikum First Nation, there is cause for celebration. Its high school is graduating the largest class of students in its history. And while many are reflecting on those they lost along the journey, as Sarah Law shows us, it has brought a new sense of hope.
This is Pikangikum First Nation's graduating class of 2023. 41 people getting their high school diploma. The largest graduating class ever.
Denzel, Gretzky, Ethan, Quill.
Denzel Quill is this year's grade 12 valedictorian.
Today is a special day, not only.
He remembers those who are not with them today.
Who meant a lot to me. It should have been here sitting amongst you guys to watch me.
I was scared. It was hard at first. I was scared to be emotional on the stage, but I wasn't in control. I just let it loose because I felt it was going to be more meaningful if I just let my emotions take over.
Chief Shirley Keeper's song to the graduates is called There Is a Happy Land, because stories of Pikangikum haven't always been happy ones. Pikangikum is a remote community northwest of Thunder Bay and is only accessible by plane or winter road. The First Nation has made headlines for fatal fires, lack of running water, and youth suicide. But Keeper says it's all about looking forward.
This past year's been so difficult. Some of our students lost their friends or cousin, or could be their brother and sister or close family, because we're all related here. So when we go through hardships, it affects every one of us. And to see so many graduates this year, it gives us more hope. And knowing that they find our school, it gives them comfort.
Geraldine Peters graduated alongside her youngest daughter, Lakota. She's one of 21 older adults to graduate from Pikangikum this year.
Yeah, I encourage everybody to get their grade 12 because I'm over 40 now. I plan on going to college soon, whenever, but I want to travel too. Yes.
That's great. Do you have a program in mind that you want to take?
Social work.
Following in your mother's footsteps.
Yes.
You must be proud then.
Yes, I am very proud.
Every class has a leader. In Pikangikum, that's Jordan Turtle.
I would just say, just pursue whatever you want to pursue, Anything is possible.
Denzel Quill is going to study photography at Red River College Polytechnic in Winnipeg.
I'm excited for him. I know he can do it. It's something we've been leaning towards, like Winnipeg. It's easier for him to travel home if he wants to. It's closer. It was his first choice, and he is a photographer.
By the way, I am Jordan Turtle. This is who? Denzel Quill, the valedictorian in the class of 2023. Come on, let's go, guys! Woo! Dude, so that's what it feels like. That's what it feels like.
Sarah Law, CBC News, Pikangikum.
So great, a lot of happy faces. Okay, so what do you think this is? It might look like a monster from a sci-fi movie, but it is actually a very tall poison ivy plant that has grown like a vine on a white ash tree. It is so tall, in fact, that Guinness Book has crowned it the world's tallest poison ivy plant. The itchy giant is our moment.
Well, I first ran into it when I was building a trail through the woods. It just looked like a hairy creature hanging off of the tree. So I went over to take a closer look and, I discovered it was a vine, and that ultimately turned out to be poison ivy. I had a lot of friends come out and I'd show them this massive poison ivy plant. A few of them were petrified. Some were impressed. And one of my friends said, hey, you should submit this to Guinness. I'm sure people have seen ones that large or larger, but there wasn't any recordings in Guinness World Records. The final height was 20.75 meters tall. That is approximately 2 school buses. I have gotten a rash from this one a number of times. A lot of people don't like poison ivy. I completely understand where they're coming from. But when it comes to, out in the woods and the natural environment, each of these plants that are native species has a role to play. And I thought it was a very majestic looking plant.
So majestic that he's touching it with his bare hands. Okay, that does not look like poison ivy. So I'm sure that many people have made the mistake. Very cool to see, though. That is the National for Friday, June 23rd. Have a good night.